Hello and welcome back. We are here with Anya Coombs from Kickstarter, and we're going to talk a little bit about diversity in games and why GaymerX East and New York City as a whole is a wonderful place for the games industry. So, yes. So tell us a little bit about what you do at Kickstarter.
Yeah, that's a great question. First, thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So I am the Games Outreach Lead at Kickstarter. That's sort of a fancy word or term to say that I help people with their projects, specifically in the games category. There's 15 different categories on Kickstarter. Games is a very, very large category. We're split essentially into three main categories in games. We have live games, so LARPs, which I have a secret passion to see. I think they're fantastic. We have tabletop, which is the bread and butter of Kickstarter, really, at least in the games category, and then video games. Obviously very popular, very important. So my job is to look for creators who want to run games on Kickstarter. That includes like completely cold outreach, like, hey, this looks really cool. Are you interested in crowdfunding? Come talk to us. Having people reach out to me directly, creators that either like have a project or will be running a project or are thinking about running a project and just like get my name or my email from somewhere, which is totally fine. Like, I'm always happy to have people reach out to me. And then also working with people on their live projects. So their project is live and they're like, oh my gosh, we hit the 3-day mark. What do we do? And I'm like, don't worry, I got you. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of communication. It's a lot of emails. It's a lot of Skype, sometimes texting, which gets awkward, but it's fine. And then a lot of going to events like this, GaymerX. I think I should calculate the number of events that I've been to this year. I want to calculate the number of events, the number of countries, and the number of cities that I've been to this year. That's sort of like my end of the year goal, just to kind of see. So it's super fun. It's a lot of travel. It's a lot of worldwide, just like gallivanting, which I can't really complain about too much. But it's super fun because like working with creators is definitely my passion. So I absolutely love my job and I'm very lucky to do what I do.
Great. What was your pathing to getting into the position that you're in right now?
Yeah, so I have it's interesting. I think this is a pretty similar path in terms of like having a non-linear path into games. So my background is actually in music. I studied music at a classical conservatory. I studied classical saxophone. This was like what I wanted to do. I'm from California, clearly from the way I'm talking. Obviously not from New York. So I worked in music for about a year and kind of realized, oh, this is super not for me. People are horrible to each other. So I was like, oh, I should probably work in games because people are never horrible to each other in games. So I just applied for a job online for this position at this website called addictinggames.com, which was 2008, and somehow got the job, which is still kind of bananas to me and also funny. And so I worked for Addicting Games, which is under the Nickelodeon umbrella. So it was always a sort of like, who do I work for? Because it was like, sometimes it was MTV Network, sometimes it was Nickelodeon, sometimes it was Addicting Games, and sort of became this person within this very small subset of the games industry, the Flash world, which is slightly ironic because Flash was so prolific and huge as like Addicting Games Anya, and really kind of cultivated a lot of relationships with creators, which was fantastic. And then moved to New York about almost 5 years ago because Nickelodeon shut our San Francisco office down, and they were moving giving a handful of people the option to move to New York to work at Nickelodeon HQ, which is actually just like right around the corner from where we are in Times Square. I'm on Times Square on a Saturday, willingly.
Oh gosh, it's so difficult.
It is. It's the actual worst. So I was like, yeah, I'll move to New York. That sounds awesome. And worked at Nickelodeon HQ for about 2.5 years. Was kind of like, I don't know if this corporate thing is really for me. Like, it's kind of a lot. And like, some people love it. I realized it's not, at least at this point in my life, not for me. Saw this like weird games outreach lead position at Kickstarter was available and was like, I'll just apply for it. And then like a month and a half later, they were like, we would like to offer you this position. And I was like, great, I will do it. Also, I think when I took the job offer, I wasn't 100% sure how much it paid, but I was just so excited about the job that I was like, I'll take it, I don't care. So kind of a weird path, but I did not get into games with any like ambition or thought of I want to be a creator, I want to be a designer, I want to program, I want to code. None of that. It was always like I want to be the voice for creators in the capacity that I can to speak for creators, which I think is super important. Obviously, like being a woman in games, I also really want to speak for women in games as much as I can, which I think it's an interesting space, right? Like we can say verbally, like, well, obviously we need more women in games, and we need to speak about women in games a lot more. But like, what does that actually mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also kind of like trying to figure that out with this role with Kickstarter, where like I can be elevated a little bit more just in terms of like visibility, and so I'm trying to kind of figure out how I can be a louder voice within a space, you know, for women and people of color and anybody that, you know, is a marginalized group as much as I can. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, that sounds like quite an endeavor, but you're super passionate about it.
Yeah, so. It's fun. It's interesting. I've been doing a thing where I've been moderating some panels at PAX, and so I'm trying to wear like activist or like political t-shirts as like my little form of protest, just to be like, you know, this is important. And so I'm trying to like grow that activist t-shirt network. So I have a couple ideas. I'm going to be doing some panels at PAX Unplugged, and so I think I'm going to have a different t-shirt every day for PAX Unplugged, because why not, right? Like it's a little form of something, so it's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's a nice way of showing people that you might not have the loudest voice, or you might be too shy, but there's different ways that you can signal to people that, hey, I'm a part of this space, and hey, I'm supportive of you, or I go through the same thing as you do.
Absolutely, yeah. It's interesting to kind of like navigate that space from a diversity standpoint, because I think people look at me and not realize that I'm also a person of color. So I'm biracial. I'm a first generation American. My mom was born in Indonesia. So I try to kind of like, I understand, you know, a little bit more of the marginalized groups, I think a little bit more than maybe I come off as. Like, I think people look at me, it's funny, it's this interesting thing with, so Hapa meaning like half Japanese but half Asian. It's a really interesting thing in our community, where a lot of people don't necessarily realize like, oh, that person's Hapa. And so I've had more than once like really funny conversations with someone where I'll like look at them on the street and just kind of go Hapa, and they go Hapa, and it's this really sort of funny interaction that we have with each other, and I'm like, all right, this is kind of fun, this is kind of cool. So I think it's interesting and fun.
Great, yeah. So in general, is there anything about advice that you want to give people who think that your path or your job is really interesting and they want to kind of get into that? What kind of advice would you give, or things to avoid?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing to avoid is like, don't be a jerk, right? Like the games industry is huge in terms of dollar amounts, but in terms of the people who actually work in the games industry, people that are within this space, it's very small. We all kind of know each other to a certain degree. I think you hear that is similar like in Hollywood or like other forms of entertainment, music, for example. There's a lot of people making content, and there's a lot of people that are involved in the making of content, but the sort of like decision makers, so to say, extremely small. So don't be a jerk. We're all going to know. Yes. If people are interested in kind of what I'm doing in terms of like not following a creative path, but instead sort of following more of the like developer relations path, essentially, like a lot of it is understanding communication, right? So you kind of have to understand the needs of creators. And I think truthfully, I think the only reason I'm even like moderately successful at what I do, I don't know what I'm doing 90% of the time, but the only reason I'm even slightly successful is that I do have a background as a performer. So I understand when people get that anxiety or people get that frustration as a creator, as an artist or a programmer, like whoever that, you know, whatever those sort of specific spaces are. So I can say like, I understand why you're frustrated. I think it's important to kind of also like know your limits and know your boundaries. And I think it's really important to also like surround yourself with a diverse set of people. So if you're like, I really want to code, obviously have your coder friends, that's important, that's awesome, but you should also be friends with programmers, you should be friends with artists. That way you can kind of understand like, okay, well, I'm not sure why my artist and I aren't necessarily getting along, so maybe I should kind of like seat myself into this world a little bit more and understand where they're coming from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's beautiful.
Cool, yay.
No, I like that a lot. But obviously, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us here this weekend, and I hope the rest of your weekend goes wonderfully.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.